Simon Cowell. To millions, that name means power, honesty, and the dream of stardom. From American Idol to The X Factor to Got Talent, he built shows that gave unknown voices a chance to be heard. For 2 decades, he wasn't just part of television, he was television. His raised eyebrow, his withering silence, his blunt words became as famous as the stars he created. Yet, the truth behind the cameras was very different. Simon's journey wasn't born from comfort or privilege. It was carved from loneliness, rejection, and tragedies that left scars no amount of fortune could erase. At 65, the man once feared for his brutal honesty now carries a story more heartbreaking than any contestant he ever judged. Simon was born in 1959 in London, into a family that looked graceful and successful from the outside. His mother, Julie, had once been a ballet dancer and carried herself with elegance. His father, Eric, worked in the music industry and built a career marked by discipline and achievement. Yet inside their home, warmth was something Simon rarely felt. He grew up longing for affection that never arrived. Years later, he admitted with painful honesty that his father never once said the words he needed most, "I am proud of you." For Simon, that silence became a scar that followed him through life. At school, things were no better. He was restless, often clashing with teachers, and never became the star pupil his parents had imagined. His classmates were remembered, while Simon felt invisible. By the time he left school, he carried only a few qualifications and an even heavier burden of disappointment. When his father arranged a position for him in the mailroom at EMI Music, it was not a moment of triumph, but a reminder of his insignificance. He delivered coffee to producers who forgot his name, and handled letters for artists whose songs filled arenas, while his own presence seemed to dissolve into the background. He later admitted that many evenings ended with him in the bathroom, quietly in tears. They were not just tears of failure, but of the fear that life had already reached its peak before it had even begun. Humiliation did not destroy Simon, it hardened him. From rejection, he learned defiance, and from neglect, he built determination. By the early 1980s, he dared to take a risk and launched his own record label called Fanfare Records. For a brief moment, success seemed to smile on him. Pop singles reached the charts, the company gained attention, and Simon tasted the sweet thrill of being noticed at last. He hosted parties, shook hands with people who once ignored him, and for the first time felt that he had escaped the shadow of invisibility. But fame in the music industry is fragile. Trends shift quickly, and the market turned against him. Within only a few years, the empire he thought he was building collapsed. Fanfare Records was gone, offices shut down, contracts worthless. Simon, still in his 30s, was left drowning in debt. Friends disappeared, creditors closed in, and once again doors slammed shut. Defeated, he moved back into his parents' home, retreating to the same bedroom that had been filled with loneliness in his youth. Now it echoed with failure. Years later, he admitted that during this time, he felt like a ghost haunting his own life, invisible once again. It was not just a failed business to him, it was personal devastation, a return to the feeling of worthlessness that had haunted him since childhood. And yet, in the ashes of that collapse, a new fire began to rise. Simon did not give up. He began to study fame itself. He analyzed what made an audience fall silent, what made them cheer, and what made them remember. Every sleepless night, every humiliation, every bitter taste of defeat became fuel for a man who refused to remain invisible forever. Simon's return to the music industry in the early 1990s was not a glorious comeback. It was an act of survival. He carried the weight of his past failure like a shadow that followed him everywhere. At BMG, where he found his next opportunity, he was not treated as a visionary. He was seen as a man who had already stumbled, someone trying to earn back trust one small step at a time. Instead of chasing timeless artists, Simon focused on what ordinary people wanted to hear. He studied the market with a sharp eye and realized that critics did not buy records, everyday listeners did. Out of desperation, he began signing acts that others mocked or dismissed. Groups like Five, duos like Robson and Jerome, and boy bands like Westlife. Purists laughed at them, but audiences loved them, and millions of records were sold. Each success carried a strange mixture of triumph and bitterness. On one hand, Simon was finally winning. On the other, the industry sneered at him, calling his acts shallow. Yet behind those sneers, he discovered the truth that would define his empire. Fame was never about perfection. It was about connection. Through every risk and every restless night, Simon pushed forward. He later admitted that even in those years of chart success, he often lay awake convinced he might lose everything again. That fear drove him harder, until, finally, in 2001, the chance of a lifetime arrived. Simon stepped out from the boardrooms and onto television screens with a new show called Pop Idol. Many doubted him. They said he was too blunt, too harsh, too cold for the screen. But what critics called cruelty, the public embraced as honesty. His piercing remarks and refusal to sugarcoat failure electrified audiences. Pop Idol became a cultural phenomenon, and Simon Cowell's face became as famous as the stars he judged. Pop Idol made Simon Cowell a household name, but it was only the beginning. In 2002, American Idol launched in the United States, and with it, Simon became one of the most talked about men on television. Week after week, millions tuned in not just to watch the contestants, but to hear Simon's verdict. His sharp comments, raised eyebrow, and long silences became iconic moments that audiences both feared and loved. By the mid-2000s, his influence expanded with the X Factor in the UK and the Got Talent franchise spreading across the globe. At the height of his success, more than 600 million viewers in over 100 countries were watching formats connected to his name. Journalists began calling him the most powerful man in television. But power carried a heavy price. The same honesty that made him admired also made him hated. Tabloids painted him as a villain. He was booed in public and often ridiculed for his bluntness. Simon admitted later that he knew people disliked him, but he could never pretend to be someone he was not. That honesty built his empire, but it also left him feeling isolated, a king sitting on a throne that sometimes felt more like a cage. Behind the cameras, the pressure was relentless. Endless auditions, long nights of production meetings, and the responsibility of carrying entire shows on his shoulders drained him. As his career reached its peak, his private life grew emptier. Friends drifted away, relationships failed. He later confessed that, even while surrounded by applause, he often felt completely alone. The cruel irony was clear. The man who gave millions their moment of recognition often ended his own nights in silence, with no one to recognize him. In 2013, the world that Simon had carefully built collapsed overnight. News broke that he was expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, who at the time was married to one of his closest friends. The headline screamed betrayal, and suddenly the man who had spent years controlling the narrative of others could not control his own. He was judged in the harshest spotlight, not as the master of talent shows, but as a man who had crossed an unforgivable line. Friends distanced themselves. Tabloids dissected every detail. The scandal spread across continents, and Simon admitted later with rare candor that it was not something he was proud of. It was the most powerless moment of his life. Yet in the middle of that chaos came an unexpected gift. In February 2014, Simon held his newborn son Eric in his arms. What began as a scandal turned into salvation. The mogul who once lived for contracts and ratings suddenly found himself living for bedtime stories, Lego towers, and the quiet joy of fatherhood. He confessed that his priorities changed completely, that his world was no longer about fame, but about the tiny boy who now depended on him. Colleagues noticed the transformation immediately. The ruthless judge who once seemed untouchable began to soften. He no longer raced from one meeting to the next, but scheduled his life around story time and playtime. Fatherhood did not erase the scars of scandal, but it gave them meaning. Simon admitted openly, "I lost friends and I lost trust, but I gained something I never knew I needed." The man who once seemed defined by sharpness had begun to show patience, vulnerability, and even humility. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing approval from the world. He was building a bond with his son. Just as Simon was adjusting to the miracle of fatherhood, life delivered a blow that shattered him. In 2015, his mother Julie passed away at the age of 89. To the world, it seemed like the natural end of a long life. To Simon, it was devastation. Julie had been the quiet anchor through his rebellious youth, the one whose approval he longed for, even if she rarely gave it. When she was gone, Simon admitted that losing his mother was the hardest thing he had ever gone through. The silence after her passing, he said, was unbearable. The grief was intensified by memories of his father, who had died in 1999 before Simon reached worldwide fame. Simon often carried the regret that his father never lived to see his success. Now, with both parents gone, he felt as if the last ties to his roots had been cut away. Friends described him as fragile and quiet, a man who had always seemed so unshakable, reduced to silence. For someone who had spent his life chasing applause, no spotlight and no success could fill the void left by losing both parents. Yet even in heartbreak, something shifted. Julie's passing forced Simon to reflect on family, on legacy, and on the importance of cherishing time. Those who worked with him began to notice a new patience, a softer side of the man once feared for his coldness. Behind the sharp wit of television's toughest judge now stood a son grieving deeply. The scars of those losses never fully faded, and they reminded him that no empire, no fortune, and no ratings victory could ever replace the love of a parent. In 2020, when Simon had just turned 60, tragedy struck in the most unexpected way. At his Malibu home, he tested a powerful new electric bike. In a single second of miscalculation, curiosity turned into catastrophe. Simon was thrown violently to the ground, and his back shattered in several places. The injury was life-threatening. Surgeons worked for 6 hours, inserting a steel rod into his spine. For a man who had always carried himself with commanding posture and unshakable confidence, the irony was cruel. He was suddenly unable to stand, unable to sit without pain, struggling even to lift a glass of water. Simon later admitted he came within a minute of losing his life. Nights in the hospital became battles with agony, where even brief moments of sleep were stolen by waves of torment. But the deepest pain was not physical. It was the fear of leaving his young son Eric behind. Lying broken in a hospital bed, Simon confessed that he thought of Eric constantly and knew he had to fight to survive. Recovery was slow and merciless. Each step felt like climbing a mountain. Friends described him as pale and frail, but they also saw the same defiance that had carried him from invisibility to fame. With Eric by his side cheering him on, Simon fought to stand again, fought to walk again, and refused to let the accident define the end of his story. Just as his strength began to return, fate struck a second time. In early 2022, another electric bike accident left him with a broken arm and fresh scars. Though less severe, it was humiliating and painful, and headlines mocked him as reckless. For Simon, the physical wounds healed slowly, but the psychological blow was deeper. It felt as if life was reminding him that control was always an illusion. Yet he refused to surrender. Both accidents changed him profoundly. They forced him to confront mortality, to slow down, and to value health and family above everything else. Scarred but standing, Simon returned to the public eye not as the invincible mogul he once appeared to be, but as a survivor who had been broken and rebuilt. After surviving accidents that nearly ended his life, Simon faced another painful struggle, this time with his own reflection. For years, he had relied on cosmetic treatments like Botox and fillers, Small changes at first meant to hold back the signs of age. At the beginning, they were barely noticeable, but as the years passed, the alterations became more visible. By 2021, fans and critics alike were stunned by how different he looked. His once expressive features appeared stiff, his trademark smirk seemed frozen, and his cheeks looked swollen. Headlines asked what had happened to Simon Cowell's face. Online memes spread without mercy. The man who had built an empire judging appearances was suddenly the one being judged. For Simon, the irony was brutal. He had spent his career controlling artists, shows, and entire television empires. Yet here he stood, unable to control the one thing, most personal, his own reflection. In later interviews, he admitted with humility that he had gone too far. He confessed that at one point, he looked in the mirror and did not even recognize himself. The ridicule hurt deeply. He began to withdraw from public life, reducing his television appearances and avoiding promotional tours. Insiders noticed he seemed quieter, softer, even diminished. For the first time, Simon truly understood what it meant to be on the other side of the judgment, exposed and vulnerable under the world's gaze. From that humiliation, he made a choice. He stopped the procedures, deciding to let nature take its course. He said he no longer wanted to chase youth. He wanted to age as himself, to be present for his son, and to focus on life rather than appearances. His new look told a story of surrender, but also of strength. Fans who once mocked him began to see something else. They saw humanity. The judge who had once been feared for his sharpness now showed the courage to accept imperfections. Each line on his face became a mark of survival. Each wrinkle, a reminder of the battles he had fought and endured. In September 2024, when Simon had finally begun to slow down and imagine a quieter life with his family, tragedy returned with a cruelty he could never have prepared for. Liam Payne, the young man Simon had first seen auditioning nervously at 16, was suddenly gone. At only 31 years old, his life ended in a fall from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires. For millions of fans, the news was shocking. For Simon, it was devastating. Liam was not just another contestant. He was part of One Direction, the group Simon had carefully pieced together in 2010, a band that went on to define an entire generation. More importantly, Liam had become like family. Simon later said that losing him felt like losing a son. Simon had known grief before. He had buried his father in 1999 and his mother in 2015. He had survived near-fatal accidents that left him scarred. But Liam's death was different. It was not the natural rhythm of life. It was sudden, merciless, and unbearably cruel. A young man in his prime, full of unwritten songs and untold stories, was taken far too soon. The world mourned together. Fans held candlelight vigils, filled social media with lyrics and photographs, and poured out their disbelief in millions of messages. But Simon's grief was more private. He shut down projects, avoided cameras, and spent his nights in silence. Insiders noticed how tightly he held his son Eric during that time, as if every laugh and every bedtime story was sacred. In private, Simon returned to old tapes of One Direction. He watched Liam and the other boys during their early auditions, so full of youth and energy. What had once been nostalgia now became a painful ritual of mourning. Each laugh and each note of music felt like a ghost. Liam's death forced Simon to reflect deeply. He began to speak less of ratings and ambition, and more of legacy and family. He admitted to close friends that life is unbearably fragile, and that even the brightest lights can be extinguished without warning. For Simon, the loss was not just professional, it was personal, and it left a scar that may never fade.
By 2025, Simon Cowell no longer looked like the ruthless judge who once dominated Saturday night television. At 65, he was a man reshaped by grief, survival, and reflection. He still sat on the Got Talent panel, but his role was different. His words were less sharp, his tone more patient. He no longer judged to wound, he judged to guide. Every comment carried the weight of his own scars. Every smile revealed the lessons of battles he had endured. At home, his life told an even clearer story. His mansion in Beverly Hills was no longer just a symbol of wealth. It had become a sanctuary where his health came first. Each morning began with careful stretches and therapy exercises designed to protect his spine that still ached from the accident in 2020. Meals were chosen with precision, designed by doctors to manage pressure, prevent disease, and fight fatigue. Even small pleasures were now measured by the demands of his body. Yet Simon often admitted that his greatest fear was not pain, but the slow dimming of his eyesight. Decades under blinding stage lights and lingering effects of his injuries had weakened his vision. Glasses became constant companions. The thought that one day he might not see his son's face clearly frightened him more than any headline ever could. Despite the struggles, Eric remained his strongest medicine. Bike rides along the coast, piano lessons at home, and bedtime stories filled the spaces once occupied by endless meetings and flashing cameras. Every laugh from his son felt like a promise, every quiet evening like a gift. Though his empire continued to generate millions through franchises like Got Talent, Simon spoke of wealth with detachment. His fortune included estates in London, Malibu, and New York, but he rarely used his luxury cars or private jet anymore. They stood still, as if waiting for an owner who had finally slowed down. He had already drafted his will, making it clear that Eric would not inherit billions. Instead, most of his money would go to children's healthcare, scholarships, and creative opportunities for disadvantaged youth. He said he wanted his son to inherit values, not riches. Simon's face now carried lines of age, his hair was touched with gray, and his body slimmer from discipline rather than vanity. He confessed that he had stopped chasing youth and would rather chase memories with Eric. Once mocked for cosmetic excess, he now embraced authenticity. Every wrinkle spoke of survival. At 65, Simon Cowell's legacy was no longer defined by ratings or empires. It was defined by endurance, humility, and love. He had stumbled, failed, been judged, and broken, but each time he found a way to rise again. His story reminds us that wealth fades, fame withers, and health falters. But what endures is the love we give, the resilience we show, and the kindness we choose.